Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today with a mental exercise. I want you to imagine you're designing a house,
Mhm.
a really complex, important, high-stakes house. You've got the blueprint spread out. You've designed a room for the plumbing, a room for the electrics, a room for legal contracts, a security room. You've thought of everything.
Sounds like a very thorough architectural plan.
It is, except you get to the end of the build, you move in, and you realize you forgot to build a room for the conscience.
The room where you decide why you built the house in the first place.
Exactly. You have all the mechanics of how to live, but no space dedicated to thinking about how we ought to live. And because you forgot that room, whenever you have a massive ethical crisis, you just sort of shove the argument into the attic among the old boxes and hope for the best.
That is a vivid and honestly a scarily accurate metaphor for what we're tackling today.
It's this paradox, isn't it? Sitting right at the heart of the British political system. And once you see it, you really can't unsee it. We are digging into a fascinating piece of writing called A Permanent Home for Parliamentary Ethics, specifically a section that challenges us to rethink the Lords.
And this isn't just about, dusty procedures or old traditions.
Mhm.
The core argument here is surprisingly urgent. It's suggesting there's a structural gap in government.
Right.
We just assume ethical debates happen naturally, that they're baked into the process. But the source argues that because there's no stable place for ethical reasoning, these huge questions just end up in the House of Lords by default.
By accident, really.
Entirely by accident. No one sat down and designed the system this way. It's a glitch.
So our mission for this deep dive is to explore that gap. We're going to look at why doing our ethical laundry in the attic is a bad idea, and then unpack this proposal for a new kind of institution.
And we should be clear,
Yeah, I want to be very clear right off the bat because I know where listeners' minds go when we say ethics body. This isn't a court, it's not a church, and it's certainly not a rival parliament.
no. It's something much more subtle, much more modest, to use the text's own word, but potentially much more powerful.
So let's get into the diagnosis first. The accidental ethics. I was reading through the material, and the author uses this phrase that just really stuck with me. They say, ethical questions are currently smuggled in.
Smuggled in. It's very evocative.
It sounds illicit, like someone is sneaking philosophy books past border control.
In a way, that's exactly what's happening structurally speaking. The source explains that the British political system, and you could say many Western systems, are designed for one thing: legislation. It's a machine for passing bills, managing budgets, winning votes.
An efficiency engine.
Exactly. It's not explicitly designed to pause that assembly line and ask, hang on, is this the right thing to do on a deep moral level?
Which seems wild when you say it out loud. You'd think that would be step one.
You would think. But because there isn't a stable place where those questions are expected on the agenda, they have to force their way in. They show up in amendments to bills, or because one specific peer in the House of Lords decides to make a personal intervention.
They're not on the guest list. They're crashing the party.
They are absolutely crashing the party.
So practically speaking, what does that look like? Let's say the government wants to pass a bill about, I don't know, using AI to screen job applicants.
Okay, perfect example. So the bill goes to the House of Commons. The debate there is usually about the politics. Will this create jobs? How much does the software cost? Will this help us win the next election?
The practicalities, the how.
Exactly. Then it goes to the Lords. And suddenly you might have a bishop or a former scientist stand up and say, hold on, this changes the fundamental nature of human agency. This dehumanizes people.
And that's the smuggling.
That is the smuggling. You're trying to wedge a deep philosophical debate into a process that just wants to get the bill signed before the summer recess.
And the text points out a huge inefficiency this causes. It's not just awkward, it's wasteful.
The source calls it rediscovering from scratch.
Yeah.
It's a form of institutional amnesia. Because there's no permanent home for these debates, the reasoning, the arguments, they aren't carried forward.
That's the part that just blew my mind. There's no memory bank.
None. So let's say we have a big debate about genetic privacy today. We have a great debate, a law gets passed. 5 years later, a bill comes up about biometric data. Instead of pulling the file and saying, here is our ethical framework for privacy, they're scrambling to build the ethical scaffolding all over again.
That sounds exhausting. It's like having to reinvent the wheel every time you want to drive to the store. Okay, first we need a round object.
It's incredibly inefficient. And it means the quality of the debate is just totally dependent on luck. It depends on who happens to be in the room that day.
Right.
If the expert on bioethics is out sick, or if that respected figure the text mentions decides to stay silent, then, well, the debate just doesn't happen.
Which brings us to the trigger points. The source implies ethics isn't a constant. It's more like a fire alarm.
Exactly. It's reactive. The source says ethics usually only pop up when something feels uncomfortable, or when a bill triggers public concern.
So we wait for the crisis, we wait for the Twitter storm or the protests, and then we say, oh, maybe we should look at the ethics of this.
Precisely. And the source explicitly says, and this is a key insight I want you to really hear, that isn't because politicians don't care about ethics. It's because the system doesn't give ethical reasoning a permanent home.
That distinction is so important. We aren't bashing politicians here. We're bashing the architecture.
We're blaming the plumbing, not the plumber.
Okay, so problem diagnosed. We're smuggling ethics. We have amnesia. And we only think about this stuff when people get angry. So what's the solution? The source says, strip away all the institutional history and constitutional baggage.
Which is hard to do in the UK. There is a lot of baggage.
Tons of it. Robes, maces, centuries of tradition. But if we strip that all away, what is actually missing?
The source argues the missing piece is simple. Expectation.
Expectation.
We need a place where ethical questions are expected, where they're a normal part of the process.
That's a huge shift from smuggled.
Massive.
Yeah.
It means these questions become part of the normal flow. The goal is transparency, to have a space where these things are discussed openly, not as a side effect of some political game.
It's the difference between a scheduled safety inspection on your car and just pulling over when the engine is on fire.
Exactly. You're signaling that ethical review is a standard part of manufacturing a law. It's not an annoyance. It's a requirement.
But, and this is where I have to play the skeptic, and I think a lot of listeners will be right there with me. Whenever you talk about an ethical body, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up a bit.
It sounds a bit Orwellian, doesn't it?
It really does. You start imagining a ministry of truth or some group of unelected people in a castle handing down commandments. Thou shalt not pass this tax bill.
And the source anticipates that reaction immediately. It spends a huge amount of time clarifying what this new home is not. And this is critical.
So let's clear the misconceptions. The source is very specific. This is not a moral authority.
Correct. It is not a Supreme Court of morality. It doesn't have the power to say this is right or this is wrong in a binding way.
And it's not about telling elected representatives what to believe.
Absolutely not. That would be a disaster for democracy. If an unelected body could tell Parliament what to do, you've ended democratic rule. The source is firm on this. It says, the last thing anyone needs is a body that claims to have the final moral answer.
I love that line. That would make things worse, not better.
It would polarize everything instantly. The text also warns against this body becoming preachy, symbolic, or performative. It's not there to wag a finger. It's a functional piece of machinery.
Okay, so if it's not a court and it's not a schoolmaster, what does doing ethics better actually look like? The source highlights a few things, but two really stood out to me: time and pluralism.
Let's start with time. This is the biggest differentiator.
Right. Modern politics runs on election cycles. 3, 4, maybe 5 years. Everything is viewed through the lens of, will this get me reelected?
Short-termism, the tyranny of the immediate.
Exactly.
The source argues this new body would have the mandate of exploring consequences over decades. It provides a space for long-term thinking that isn't constantly being filtered through the pressure of the next campaign.
That is a luxury most politicians don't have. To sit back and say, okay, this reform looks good for 2026, but what does it do to the social contract in 2050?
Precisely. It allows for what you could call intergenerational ethics. Thinking about people who haven't even been born yet. A politician cares about the voter now. This body cares about the citizen who will exist in 30 years.
That's a powerful shift. And what about pluralism? How does the source define it here?
This is fascinating. Usually in politics, the goal is victory. You have one view versus another view, and the goal is to beat the other guy.
Right, to dominate. 51% beats 49.
But here, the source says the goal isn't consensus. The goal is to surface disagreement.
Surface it? You mean bring the fight out into the open?
Yes, but in a structured, analytical way. The text argues that we shouldn't be smoothing over disagreement for speed. We should expect it. This body needs to include religious perspectives, non-religious perspectives, different philosophical frameworks, all of it.
So they don't have to agree?
No. The value is in showing how they disagree. The reasoning needs to be visible.
That's really interesting. So a report from this body wouldn't just say approved. It would say, here is the utilitarian argument for this bill, and here is the human rights argument against it, and here's the consequence of choosing one over the other.
Exactly. It maps the terrain, it shows the trade-offs, it forces politicians to acknowledge that by choosing A, they're sacrificing B.
Which brings us to power. And this is where I struggle a bit. If they can't veto a law, isn't this just a talking shop? A fancy debating society?
That's the cynical view, and it's a fair question. But the source argues its influence comes solely from clarity.
Clarity as a weapon.
In a way, by analyzing the ethical dimensions clearly and publicly, they make those dimensions impossible to ignore. It puts the burden back on the elected representatives. They can still pass the law, but they can't pretend they didn't know the ethical cost.
It's like turning on the lights in a dark room. You can still choose to walk into the furniture, but you can't say you didn't see it.
That's the hope. It raises the political cost of being unethical. If there's a rigorous public report out there, the MP who votes for the harmful policy has to own that.
I want to circle back then. We have the House of Lords. It's full of experienced people, experts, former judges. Why not just fix the Lords?
This is the most common counterargument. Why build something new when we have this whole chamber of elders? Just give them a clearer mandate.
Right. Tell them, okay, Tuesdays are for ethics now.
But the analysis argues that keeping it in the Lords traps us. It keeps ethics tangled up with questions of democratic legitimacy.
Ah, right. The old debate about why do we have unelected Lords anyway?
Exactly. Think about it. If the House of Lords blocks a government bill on ethical grounds, what does the government say?
They say, who are these unelected aristocrats trying to stop the will of the people?
Exactly. They make it about power. They make it about democracy versus elitism. The actual ethical point gets completely lost in that fight.
So the ethical argument gets weaponized.
It gets mixed up with delay and obstruction, as the source says. If you separate the ethical body from the legislative body, you separate the argument about morality from the argument about power.
That makes a lot of sense. You depoliticize the ethics.
Or at least you de-weaponize it. You create a space where the argument is purely about the content.
And there's still that logistical issue, the who's in the room factor.
Yes.
Yeah.
The current system relies on pure luck. If the world's leading expert on genetic engineering happens to be a lord, and happens to be in London, and happens to catch the speaker's eye, then you get a good debate.
That's way too precarious. We saved the country because Lord Smith didn't have a dentist appointment.
It really is that fragile. The source argues that pulling ethics out into its own space isn't a downgrade for the Lords. It's about giving the function a clearer shape and a clearer purpose. It's professionalizing it.
So we're not firing the Lords. We're just taking this specific job away from them so it can be done properly.
Concisely.
So let's try to visualize this. The source admits this isn't a blueprint. It calls it a direction of travel. But what does this different kind of institution actually look like?
Well, based on the text, we know the attributes. It's modest, and it's focused.
Modest is not a word you usually hear in politics.
No, it isn't. But it's vital here. It suggests a small, standing body, not hundreds of people, maybe a few dozen. People chosen for their ability to reason, not their party loyalty.
And the mechanism, how does it actually work?
The key image is the feedback loop.
Walk me through that.
Parliament proposes a policy. It's like, we want to introduce digital ID cards. That proposal gets sent to this new body. They don't vote on it. They examine it. They look at all the pluralistic implications, privacy, exclusion, data security.
They do the deep dive.
They do the deep dive. And then they feed its reasoning back into the democratic process without trying to override it. They attach a report, a clarity document.
So when the MPs finally vote, they have that document on their desks.
Yes. And maybe the media has it too,
Mm-hmm.
and the public. It creates a pause for thought, a moment of reflection embedded right in the system.
From accidental ethics to deliberate ethics.
That is the vision. But the source is very clear. This is, at this stage, just a direction of travel. It's an invitation to think.
An invitation to stop drifting and start steering. So let's recap. We started with the House of Lords as the accidental Airbnb for ethical debates.
Which leads to smuggling, rediscovering the wheel, and inefficiency.
Then we looked at the proposal. A new, stable home. Not a moral court, but a place for clarity, for looking at the long term.
And a place that relies on the power of argument, not the power of a veto. That's the crucial distinction.
So here's the big question. What does this all mean for you, the listener? Why should you care about constitutional plumbing? It sounds so dry.
It sounds dry until the water stops working, or until the water is poisoned.
Right.
This plumbing determines what comes out of the tap. We are entering an era of incredibly complex decisions. AI, genetic modification, climate change. These aren't just technical problems, they are deeply moral ones.
And if our system is only designed to answer, will I win the next election? We are going to make bad choices.
We're going to make short-sighted choices. If we want better government decisions, decisions that consider everyone, we need a specific space for thinking about right and wrong.
A space that's separate from the noise. It's about ensuring that right and wrong isn't just an afterthought.
And that leads us to the final provocative thought the source leaves us with. It's really a challenge to your imagination.
Go on.
The source says, if we accept this direction of travel, if we accept we need this modest, focused, ethical body, what might it actually look like in practice?
That is the question I want to leave with you today. Close your eyes and picture it. Who sits in those chairs? How are they chosen? If it's not the lords and it's not bishops, who is it? Philosophers. Randomly selected citizens.
It's a difficult question, but it's one we might need to answer if we want a government that can actually handle the future.
A permanent home for ethics. That's a bold idea. Thanks for diving in with us today.
A pleasure.
We'll see you on the next one.